quite difficult to navigate and difficult to understand. And there are so many, and they have similarities and differences, and they fund some really big projects. And so that's really exciting. So we are absolutely thrilled to be, have you here, Sydney, from the Digital Supercluster, telling us all more about how they work. So welcome, everybody. This is the Superclusters and Innovation 101 webinar presented by Pocketed and the Digital Supercluster. I'm Aria Hahn, our CTO, and I am joined by Sydney Goodfellow, the director of the Digital Learning Lab at the Digital Supercluster. A couple of housekeeping things before we get started. We absolutely are recording this session, and our team will make the recording available after. And at the end, there is a code for free access to the basic level of the Pocketed software as well. So hang tight, it is all coming. And without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Sydney.
Thanks so much, Aria, and thank you so much for the invitation to be here. I'm really excited to be talking to all of you today about the work that we do and how to navigate the sometimes complicated world of clusters. I do want to say, before I jump into the next sections, I think colloquially we are known as the superclusters, and I think that is how people talk about us. We have Canada's Ocean Supercluster. People still often refer to us as the Digital Technology Supercluster. In 2021, the program was rebranded to be the Global Innovation Cluster Initiative. So if you hear people talk about superclusters or global innovation clusters or clusters, what they are referring to is the Innovation, Science, and Economic Development, ISED, the federal department program, really looking at collaborative innovation and how we can increase Canada's capacity for innovation generally. And so we as an organization are known as digital, and that's what I'll be referring to us as. But I think, again, colloquially, we still often think about the Supercluster initiative as well. So now, as Aria mentioned, I'm in Vancouver, and a lot of the digital team is here. We are based and very grateful to be on the unceded and ancestral territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. Very, very grateful for the stewardship of these lands, to be living and working and playing here. And as Aria said, we welcome folks to pop in the chat where you are calling in from as well. To the next slide, please. So I'm going to talk about digital and who we are. We are one of 5 clusters or superclusters across Canada. And as I mentioned, we are part of the federal initiative, the Global Innovation Cluster Initiative. So I'm going to talk a little bit about who digital is, how we work, and I'm going to get a little bit into the weeds. I apologize in advance, but I have a feeling that's kind of what folks are really here to learn is how do we engage with the cluster? What should we be thinking about? What are the kind of ins and outs and the nuances with working with us? So looking forward to this conversation. And so starting with who we are, if you want to just forward to the next slide there. Awesome. So we are an organization that exists to help commercialize and globalize research and really try to cultivate the creation of Canadian-owned intellectual property. So when we were founded as a concept back in 2018, we were really looking at Canada's underinvestment on research and development compared with other OECD nations like the United States. And looking at, okay, you know, I think we often talk about Canada's challenges related to productivity. We look at the makeup of our economy being very resource-based, historically speaking, and really what can we be doing as an industry, as government, as industry, as nonprofits, to be navigating that and to be encouraging and incentivizing investment into research and development so that more and more Canadian companies are able to build and retain their IP. And this comes with all kinds of secondary benefits. we were also looking at the fact that Canada is a relatively small country, and we don't have the same volume or concentration of companies here that a lot of the other OECD countries do. And so the idea that was kind of pulled forward at that time is the idea of collaborative innovation. So if we pull people together to work collaboratively on a concept where we have customers at the table, and we'll talk about this more in the model, where we have customers, we've got small businesses, we've got universities, then the combined kind of 1+1=3 nature of that collaboration is where we can play a role. And over the past, since 2018, so over the past, I guess, 6 years now, we've been honing that model, where now we are really the place to go for that collaborative innovation model, where we're supporting businesses not only with accessing investment into subsidizing and supporting the creation of intellectual property, but we're also helping small companies work with big companies, and big companies work with universities, and really understanding how that idea of kind of the three-legged stool of innovation can work, of the public and the private and the nonprofit sector can work together. So here you've got a bit of a picture of how this all flows together. So we work with the typical consortium model is a collection of at least one scale-up or SME, and we often talk about, in all the ways that we talk about ourselves, I think one of the main reasons we exist is to help grow SMEs in Canada. And we act as a co-investor. Typically, there is a post-secondary or research institution at the table with a project. There is usually a technical service provider, depending on the nature of the project, a system integration or cloud-based, server-based provider. Critically, there is a potential customer or distributor, and we'll talk about our demand-driven model. And then there would be a technology leader, so someone who's really owning that product that's being developed. So we'll get more into this, but really this is to just drive home the fact that we are looking at collaborative innovation and kind of bringing these disparate and sometimes unlikely partners together to do something that they couldn't do on their own. An innovative model for innovation. We say the word innovation a lot in our organization. So how we work, if we want to pop over to there. So these three components are really what I think drive our organization. And so these are not only important from a kind of purpose or mission concept, but they're also really critical in understanding how to work with us. So when you see a call for proposals open through digital, these are the three things that we're really, we've got our evaluation criteria that you can always see in our program guides. We'll talk about how that works. But these are really the three fundamental principles that are driving who we are and the type of projects that we're investing in. So the first piece is the demand-based collaborative innovation. So that gets back to the last slide that I was just walking through. Diverse parties are coming together. Sometimes that's challenging. Sometimes that there's conflict. Sometimes there's really different personalities. I mean, we talk about technology, but what we've learned over the last 6 years is, success is largely predicated on the people that are sitting around that table. And how they're working together and how they're communicating. So that model of collaborative innovation and who's at the table and who you are building this with, that's really the critical piece. And so what we look for there are diverse consortia that are tailor-made to meet what it is that you're trying to build. So if you're trying to build something that is working and delivering in a specific location, who are you working with? Who understands that location and really knows it well? Looking at academia, industry, SMEs, public sector, and addressing big problems together, again, that better than any single organization could do alone. So collaboration is always going to be part of our DNA and part of what we do, and it's going to be a big part of how we look at different projects. The next is co-investment. So collaboration, co-investment. Co-investment model is what I'm going to spend the most of the time talking about today, because I think that's partially the part that's most confusing for people is how does co-investment work and what are the rules around it and how do we access it? But really what the co-investment does at its core is de-risk and accelerate technology development. If we are encouraging groups of partners to come together, we are also a partner making an investment. We have a stake in that. We are very supportive of its success. And that's the same for all partners. So all partners have a skin in the game. They're coming together. And so when all those partners put a little bit together on the table, then everybody benefits from everyone else's kind of confidence in that. And so that's really that special sauce, I suppose. If the collaboration is our approach, this is really the thing that I think people think about when they think of us. And we often, people sometimes come and say, how do I access a Supercluster grant? And we are very quick to say, this is not what that is. This is a collaborative investment in a shared project. And that's really, I think, the part that can be confusing for folks who've navigated all the other elements of government funding and all the other kind of avenues for government funding. This is not just government funding. This is a collaboration between the public and private sector. The third kind of principle that I think really defines who we are is the industry-led or customer voice at the table model, the demand-driven model that we take. So in all projects, a customer is in the consortium, really driving forward that need. So the typical model for investment in innovation, kind of prior to the clusters, was a one-to-one investment. So government or private sector would invest in one company to build its own IP. Great model, always going to, exist in one form or another. But really what this was looking at is, okay, rather than looking at increasing the supply of solutions, we want to link the supply with the demand. We want to connect customers with companies so that they're building something together. And it really represents what that industry is looking for and wants and needs. And so the way that looks functionally is that you have a customer in the consortium embedded directly. I lead our talent programs as the director of the Digital Learning Lab. And the way that looks in talent is you don't want to train people for jobs that don't exist. So the employer is at the table in those training projects. So that's kind of how that's represented. Whereas if in the technology side, let's say you're building a health technology, a potential purchaser of that health technology is directly in the consortium, really saying, yep, this is working. No, it's not. Here's what we would change. And so you get that kind of product market fit, if you will, embedded directly into the way the project is being developed. So these three pieces, again, there are core principles, but they're also part of what we are going to look for. When you look at our evaluation criteria, when you look at our calls for proposals, there's always going to be these three things that are part of it. And I think this is what sets us apart from other granting programs. Next slide, please. So, like I said, I'm going to spend a lot of time today talking about our co-investment principles, because I think in terms of the collaboration and the demand-driven, that is really based project to project. So who should be in your consortium? We have the kind of core three of the startup or the SME, the university, and the customer. But beyond that, it's really, really depends on your project. And it's something we can support with to kind of say, you know what, here's the kind of rough consortium makeup that you could consider. And on the demand-driven side, that's kind of part of the collaboration because the customer is embedded into your consortium. It's really the co-investment that I think we get a lot of questions on and people are really curious about. So I've got, again, kind of the nitty-gritty here, but what we do at Digital is we co-invest against costs that are incremental, reasonable, and directly related to the project. We invest on a cost basis. So you come and we've got a picture for this, but you come and say, like, this is kind of overall what the project is going to cost. This is what we're asking for from Digital. And that's that co-investment piece. So our contribution makes up a percentage, up to 35% of the overall project costs. Consortium partners are not here to make a profit. And by that, we mean off of our investment. Of course, profit is the ultimate goal for a lot of our partners and customers, and we are supportive of that. But really, this is not about bringing on more funding than costs. And then the skin in the game piece is really that all partners must have a meaningful level of co-investment. So when you think about this, really all of this logically ties to what our model was in the previous slide and what our model is, which is if this is going to be a collaborative concept, each partner really needs to benefit and have risk in a way that is meaningful for each. So co-investment refers to the concept that the consortium partners, including Digital, are sharing in the total investment required to fund the collective costs for a specific project. So again, we are a collection of investors working together to see this concept come to fruition. Next slide, please. So this kind of comes in as another breakdown of how that works. So the cost of the delivery commitments, the cost of work. So let's say you have $1 million project. Doing it is going to cost overall $1 million. And then you have kind of who is paying for the work embedded directly into the consortium. So digital is paying for 300,000 of that. You have other partners paying 100,000 and 200,000, and that adds up to a total of $1 million so that your costs and your investments match. Then you adjust those costs for delivery commitments, and that leads to your net costs. And then you have a partner co-investment rate and a digital co-investment rate. And this is the part I think that can be a little bit confusing. So digital will co-invest up to 35%, depending on the program stream. On the talent side, we actually go up to 50%, but for technology, up to 35% co-investment rate. And your partner co-investment rate would be the remainder, so 65% or more, depending on where you're at. That's a little bit different in reality. We'll get into the member fee piece, but that's roughly where it's at. So you can see kind of that's based on the idea that you have at least 3 partners. And so there's a third, a third, a third really represented by each of those partners, and that's where we get that kind of meaningful piece. It doesn't always work out to a third, a third, a third, because there may be more partners than that at the table. But that's how we calculate the co-investment rate. And then let's say your project in total costs $1 million. Then for every dollar spent, we would cover up to 35 cents of that dollar. And that's how that model works. Next slide, please. So how do you work with us? This is, I think, the kind of big question. So first, I'm going to talk about the role that digital plays. And again, this is as part of that consortium. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about kind of how that all works and flows through. So digital is a co-investor in the project. I feel like I'll say that 4,000 times probably through the course of today, but it's we are not a grantor. We are not kind of throwing funds and then we have kind of a funder-fundee relationship. What we do is we actually take those core consortium members and they become voting members of the governance structure that we use to monitor this investment, which is a steering committee. So typically when you're working with a government investor or an investor of any kind, really, you take those funds, you report back on how you use those funds, and that's the nature of the dynamic. Because we are bringing more than funds to the table, we are a partner in this kind of shared vision. We are actually just one of several voting members that form what we call the steering committee. So the steering committee will meet on a monthly or quarterly basis, depending on kind of the nature of the project, the complexity of the project. And decisions will be made collaboratively. So if we want to change the budget, change the timeline, rather than kind of digital being the core kind of rule holder, we are also a collaborative partner, really saying, okay, is this the thing that's going to help make this project successful? So we have more of a partner kind of role than a typical funder might. We oversee our investment. So again, we oversee how that 35% is being used, but we understand that there are other investments at the table and different funders, different stakeholders are going to have different interests in how they want to manage that. We also support media outreach, relationship building, big picture planning. So once you're kind of in the ecosystem, if you will, we do what we can, again, as an investor to help make this project successful. So we'll help to place, earned media. We'll help with global outreach. We'll nominate you for awards. We will really try and do what we can and put our kind of full force behind your project to help ensure that it's successful. We'll also, you will report to us and we will report to our funder, which is the Department of Innovation, Science and Economic Development, or ISED. And that kind of, you would form one project. And for us, all of the projects kind of add up to this big picture of how we are moving the needle and pushing innovation in Canada forward. Next slide, please. So how does that work? How do you kind of get digital as a member of your team with our investment at the table? We do this through an application process, a 2-step application process, which involves the expression of interest and the full proposal. There's actually a little step before that you have here, which is the registering the project concept online. So for many people, this application process can appear daunting, time consuming. We've heard from partners that the application process, because it's collaborative, can take a lot longer than your typical funding stream. So, you are having to coordinate sometimes 10 partners and what their contribution is. And it's not just that you're saying, hey, I need a letter of support. It's, hey, what's your contribution? How committed to that are you? What's your contribution in terms of time, resources, as well as funds? So it can be really complicated. We're very aware of that. But on the flip side, we do receive feedback that our proposal or application process is also a really great way to hone your concept, whether you receive the funding or not. Because of our rigorous process where you go through an internal evaluation and an external evaluation, we provide feedback, we provide support. It's a great way to really look deeply at your IP. How ready are you to be working with a large company? How ready are you to be acquiring or adopting technologies as a larger company? What's your data strategy, your privacy strategy? Really, we're having experts dissect your model and provide feedback to you regardless of the outcome. And so it can be a really challenging process, but ultimately our goal is to be supportive of teams, whether they receive funding or not, because that's one of the services really that we provide to the ecosystem in addition to the funding. So you would register your concept. If the concept is aligned with that specific call for proposals program guide, which all of this information is available on our website, then you would be invited to submit an expression of interest. An expression of interest is really just a kind of brief overview of what you're thinking. So we try to go in increasing levels of commitment, so you're not just going all the way and then realizing that you are nowhere near fitting. We really try to say, okay, you're only going to do the next level of commitment if we really feel like there's a fit there. So we would assess the eligibility, the fit, and the readiness of the project team, the execution and commercial strategy. So really looking at, is it aligned, and do we see high potential for success at the next stage, such that we're not kind of sending you on a wild goose chase. And then the third and final stage is full external evaluation by an independent project selection committee. And really your full proposal forms, if you think about what a contribution agreement process might look with another government funder, it's basically that. So the idea is that at the end of your full project proposal process, you're ready to sign a contract. Your full proposal package and the terms and conditions of the contract come together, and that forms the contract. So you have your budget done, you have your project plan done, all of the pieces are there. The other thing that I would add that's a little bit different for us here is the kind of, because we're very much an innovation program, it's an iterative model. So you may have, a step-by-step plan over the next 3 years and how you're going to move $10 million to do this thing. You get 6 months in, realize it's not what you thought it was going to be, and actually you need to do a pretty hard pivot. That's the role of the steering committee. That's why we are one of many voters providing kind of input on where to go. So I say that because that kind of contract isn't, we're going to make sure you stick to exactly what your contract said for the duration of the project. It's really a starting point, a foundation for how the group is going to work together. And then we have an ability to adapt together as we move along. Next slide, please. Okay, so this is where we get into a little bit more nitty-gritty about how to work with us. So we have 2 tiers of membership, and in order to receive co-investment from Digital, you do need to be a paying member. So I'll talk about what that means. But you can join as an associate at any time, and it's free. So it's basically like subscribing to a newsletter. And so for any future calls for proposals, you would be notified. For any events, you would be notified. And you can explore the digital ecosystem and have the potential to be invited by members, because you would be kind of part of this broader ecosystem. We've got, between associates and members, we've got about 1,500 organizations across Canada that we're working with. So you become part of kind of our broader community. So really encourage anybody who's curious to just join as an associate. It's super easy. And we can share the link if we haven't already. Members is kind of the next up. And this is that paid piece where member organizations you have to be a paying member in order to receive those funds and to be a consortium, assigned consortium member in a project. So what this means is that you have an annual membership fee of $5,000 plus 5% of eligible costs claimed. So really what that means, and we'll talk about that in a moment, is that 35% co-investment actually works out to about 30% co-investment when you have that deduction. And this is how we cover our costs to provide that level of support around feedback on your project team, matchmaking, the global PR and media relations support, access to government, access to other partners. That's really the events, all of that kind of ecosystem of support that we provide in addition to the funding is made possible by our paying members. Next slide, please. So some general tips. When you are working on a proposal to work with digital, although it is collaborative, we highly encourage a single proposal writer to hold the pen. Sometimes folks have proposal writers on staff. Sometimes this is your project manager. Sometimes this is your technical person who happens to also be a great writer. And I think this is a good metaphor for also how successful consortia are managed. In the early days of digital, we let teams kind of decide how they wanted to manage them. Sometimes it was a project manager. Sometimes it was someone doing it off the side of their desk. And it was so critical to the success of projects that they had one single lead that we require that now what we call a consortium director to be assigned, and their role is really clearly identified. And that's the same kind of from the beginning stages all the way through to the end. I'm sure anybody who's worked on a collaborative project knows the value of having a clear leader at every step of the way. So that's the first piece there. Remain disciplined to maintain the team momentum. So this is a marathon, not a sprint, but it's also a sprint because sometimes you're trying to get a proposal complete as quickly as you possibly can. So I think depending on how much time you have, really having setting up regular checkpoints with all your consortium members at that stage. So whether it's weekly check-ins or biweekly, depending on how long you have, to really keep things rolling can help, because often we have continuous intake calls where funds, it's kind of first come, first serve. So you have lots of time on paper, but in reality, those funds are being drawn down all the time. And so it's really making sure that you are working together to meet those deadlines. This is a no-brainer. Ensure the eligibility and evaluation criteria are met. You can see the program guides. We actually don't have a call open currently, so that's more something that will come into play when you are kind of looking for funds there. Start the hard conversations early. So I mentioned, the people are really the make or break of a consortium. So what we recommend is start having conversations about IP creation and ownership early on. So if you are building a joint piece of IP, who owns what? How are you managing the background IP or the IP that people are bringing in that's theirs versus the IP that's being created collaboratively? This is often where teams are tripped up, where they have the most challenge. And so really making sure that that's addressed at the front end will prevent a world of issues in the back end. And that's something that we have expertise on staff to support with and to help navigate those sometimes very challenging conversations. Something I didn't mention, but will, is that digital has a stake as a stakeholder, but we don't take equity. We don't take ownership of the IP at all. So this is really shared between the consortium, the other consortium members. Digital is more of kind of an external stakeholder in that way. Keep a long-term commercial focus from the outset. So this is really looking at, if you are trying to build something that has kind of a near-term demand, or it's something like you aren't sure kind of what the long-term commercial potential is, that's okay. We are open to experimentation, but I think what we want is bold and ambitious projects and concepts. So what we don't want to see is something that is intended to be short-lived. We really want to look for these kind of game-changing long-term ideas. And then the final piece is we are here to support. That is, digital is, yes, we are a government-funded organization with lots of, challenging pieces to navigate. But we're also a bunch of people who really want to support Canadian industry, who want to support companies to develop IP and retain that IP in Canada. So if you're not sure, if you have questions, if you're just interested, please do reach out to us. we would love to chat with you. And then a little sticky note here that relates to what I already said about the leadership piece. Having a clearly defined leader is really critical. Okay. So for more information, you can head to our website. I think that's linked in the chat. So thank you so much. You can also see FAQs, updates and announcements, and any concept intake submission. So anytime there is a call for proposals open, it will be available there on our website. Once you are an associate or member, you can access our community portal where you can view our reports, any project-related templates. So things like your reporting templates, our policies, IP policies, all of that. And you will access the proposal portal. So that's where you would be able to submit your concepts. Basically, anything that you need is on our website. And if it's not there, join as an associate and you'll probably find it on the community portal. And I believe that's all we have for now.
Yeah, thanks, Sydney. That's excellent, and actually a really great segue. I'll try to get through a few more slides here, but leave lots of questions, lots of time for questions for Sydney, of course, at the end. So thanks everybody, and keep the questions coming. It's always great to have those in there. Like Sydney said, well, the Supercluster does invest money. It is not a traditional grant, and so that it is an investment and a collaboration. And through my personal experience with it, I think that does really, really reflect the on the ground kind of role and opportunity that it does present. And so, thank you so much. That was really wonderful. But there are grants and tax credits in Canada beyond Supercluster, or that can be complementary to Supercluster as well. And so just like Sydney talked a lot about the support that they provide, they do want to also provide, they want you to access other grants and other opportunities as well. And we'll even pull partners and experts in who say, oh, this part of this project could be funded on this grant. And that will actually allow us to move that budget even further. And so they are supportive of these, and they are complementary. So that is another really, really important piece to remember. There are $5.9 billion available every year in Canada through grants and tax credits. So it's a lot of money. Nice. Yes. And they're really along this whole journey of an SME, all the way up to, unicorn status. And so right from the idea stage, you can start thinking about grants and tax credits and how you want to structure it. And this can look like a lot of things. So you could structure it by, making sure you incorporate in provinces that have money for the type of activities that you'd like. You can start by thinking, oh, do I need to incorporate so that I can access certain grants? If I'm going to do lots of R&D and I want to do tax credits, I know that I need to be a Canadian controlled corporation. So even at the idea stage, there can be some foresight into kind of how you're setting up your business in such a way that you can access all of the funding kind of along the way. The first kind of grants you can get are often hiring grants, not exclusively, but often. And so the earliest of startups can access help with teams. And that is, those grants kind of started around $5,000. And then as you grow, so do the granting opportunities. And so we often get very small, great startups, excellent ideas come and say, look, I want $1 million grant. And we have to say, it's not how it works. You got to step up to that. So let's start you with grants that are reflective of your current size and stage, and they will grow with you, and they do. And we do see that as well. Next slide, please. I also just want to say it's not only for traditional technology. And so I think we often think of grants, people come and say, well, I'm not in the health space and I'm not in the technology space, and so there's nothing for me. And so I like to show that these are products and produced by a Canadian company that works with Pocketed, and they access $56,000 in export funding. They want to take their makeup packaging and cases outside of the country. And because they actually innovated on how they're manufacturing the actual packaging for the makeup, they were able to access research and development funding as well. So very, very important to think about these things creatively. One of the superclusters is around advanced manufacturing, right? There's lots of opportunity for companies beyond software, and AI, although there's lots of funding for those things too. But we really want to think about funding in this broad spectrum. Next slide, please. Another example, COVID exposed a lot of things about the Canadian economy, and the government has invested accordingly. So lots of supply chain management, agri-food processing. So we're working with some really great food and beverage companies. And again, they are innovating. They're innovating on recipes, on the way they're distributing, on their manufacturing. This is all R&D. They also want to, again, export their products outside of the country, and there's funding for that as well. So the Canadian government is really supportive of, you own the IP in Canada, the company operates in Canada, but we know that our neighbors to the south are 10 times as big as us. And so if you want to start exporting into the United States, that's good for the Canadian economy as well. And so there is a lot of support for that, or beyond. Next slide, please. And the grants get bigger. And so this is a company it's actually a combination of AI software and hard tech. And it's a life-saving technology that helps find people who have gone missing in water bodies with a ton of success. And, there's so many different streams of funding for ideas like this that can be so game-changing in that minute. Really, really impressive story. And so they were able to access innovation funding, health funding, safety funding, all sorts, hiring, all sorts of things that companies need to be successful. The grants that the government does support align with both the government priorities, but also they try to align with the needs of businesses. And so really understanding how the different grants can help you leverage it, and how the money that you're already going to spend can be extended by using grants, is an art, and we're here to help, but it is there. Next slide, please. Often people come and they talk about their company, and that's great. We love to hear about the company. It's actually one of the most fun things about being involved with Pocketed and founding Pocketed has been talking to amazing entrepreneurs and hearing ideas really across the spectrum of products and services and ideas. But what is actually more fundable than your company and the core of what your company does and deliver is the activities that you're doing within your company. And so as soon as you switch your mindset from my company is a makeup company to actually my company is creating jobs for the economy, we are doing R&D, all of a sudden, instead of looking up grants for makeup companies, which you're going to find none, you're starting to look up job grants for creating jobs, grants for R&D, and you will have more success. And so at a very high level, these are kind of 6 buckets of really great examples of activities in your business. And again, it doesn't matter what the core of your business is. If you're doing these activities, these are the types of things that are fundable in the current granting landscape. So always creating jobs, of course. Canadians, we want everybody to have meaningful work, and that is a focus of many of the job creation or hiring grants and wage subsidies are creating meaningful work. And so work where people gain experience, where we're contributing to the economy, where they're learning. R&D, of course, we always need that. Innovation, IP funding, all of that kind of falls under, if you're doing R&D, those are buckets of funds you might be able to benefit from. Upskilling the workforce. I think everyone here has probably tried ChatGPT by this point. And I mean, it's not what I think the worst fears were when it first came out, where everyone was like, well, no one's going to have jobs and this is going to take over everything. However, learning how to use it well is a huge skill, and learning how we can put generative AI into existing products and processes is really important for efficiency and making sure that Canada stays having our competitive edge. And so there's lots of funding for those kinds of things too, training. Sustainability, purchasing equipment, and of course, exporting and market expansion, which I've already touched on a little bit. So these are activities that are very, very fundable. As soon as you're doing these types of activities, that's when you want to start looking for grants. Next slide, please. Here are things that are typically not fundable. And often, you don't want to do the negative, but I think it's really, really important here because we get these questions a lot. There's not really grants for business as usual. You can't keep the lights on with grants. It's just not how it works. Routine operational expenses, very similarly, not something that is well funded. Marketing, it's really sad. We get so many people coming through saying, I want to do more marketing. And there's not a ton, but hot tip, you can hire marketers. And so you can use wage subsidies and hiring grants to hire people who know about marketing to get that work done. Founder salaries, very, very rarely fundable. There's a little bit of that during COVID. If you're a university student, there can be. Outside of that, not really. Very hard to fund existing employees or family, I think, for obvious conflict reasons there. General business maintenance, debt repayment, personal expenses, or buying another business, things that just are not grant fundable. This needs to be done by revenue or otherwise raised capital. Next slide, please. So then there are a lot of grants open at any time. And so today in Canada, there are approximately 1,877 grants that are open and actively accepting applications. But of those, next slide, you're probably eligible for about 77. And so this is the average number of programs that a company is eligible for based on our 17,000 users. And of those 77 programs that you're eligible for that you could apply for, there are probably 3 that are relevant to you right now, that are relevant to your business today that you really need to chase and go after. And so it seems like this huge pool, but it really is about narrowing that down to the appropriate or most relevant programs, the things that are going to have the most impact for you. They're hard to do, right? Like you've always got to there's proposals to write, and you got to get your ducks in a row and tell a good story and really craft that narrative. And so you want to focus on the grants or tax credits and opportunities that are going to have the biggest impact for you. Next slide. We can help with the process, so we can help you do that matching. So go from that big pool down to the eligible, down to the relevant. And so we're here to help with services and, of course, our software. We can help you apply. One person holding the pen is a really, really great idea and definitely makes a difference. If you've ever done a group project where different people write different chapters, you can always tell. And so having kind of that unified story is really, really important. And then, of course, help you win. Next slide, please. Okay, a couple of quick tips. Include grants in your overall strategy from day one. Wherever you're hiring, you should be including it. If you're going to do R&D, making sure that you're set up in a way where you can take advantage of those tax credits and grants. You can scan this, and there's a free funding roadmap tool to help you do this from early on. We say don't wait until you're desperate. Grants can be slow, so they can take 30 days is a fast turnaround to find out if you're going to get the money. Most are 60, 90, and for larger amounts, it can be months and months and months. So really including the strategy from day one, very important. Next slide, please. Have a dedicated grants champion. Yes, someone on your team. It can be the founder. It can be, your CFO. It can be a team member who is just really into it, who is continuing to look. These deadlines come and go so quickly. We see some grants open and close within 48 hours. So they come, all of the money is allocated within 2 days. And so making sure you have a champion who's watching for those opportunities and getting on them as they come up is really essential. Leverage experts. Yes, especially for those larger amounts. The best writers on the planet have editors. It is impossible to edit your own work as efficiently as an outside person can do it. And so work with an expert or have somebody who's less connected or unconnected to the project in that intimate way. Really go through and edit anything that you're going to send to a funder to make sure it's clear to externals, to make sure that the message is coming across, that it's unified, that you have clear goals and objectives, and they do align with the call to which you're responding. And so it's very, very important to leverage that expert and get that outside opinion. Again, editors are so important, and there's not a professional writer I've ever heard speak on who doesn't say, my editor, thank you to my editor made this better. And so it really, really is important, I think, to have experts and external review. build relationships with funders and seek feedback. And I think Sydney did such a great job of talking about that today, where she's like, you don't have to start by applying for a huge project. You can call us, you can ask questions, you can sign up as an associate member, you can access us and see how we can do that. Or to your point, Sydney, how you're looking to support projects, even if they're not funded, there might be other ways you can support through intros, through feedback. And getting feedback is really, really important all the time. And so we do encourage people, reach out to funding bodies, reach out to ISED, reach out to Sydney and ask questions, because that really is how you'll learn more and be more successful in this space. And then also think about how grants can help fund your customers. And so we often see that where we'll show people a grant and they'll say, well, it's not really for us, but I guess our customers could use that. And if they had that funding, they could actually use that to subsidize our own services and work product. And so this is a really important thing to think about as well. We're seeing a lot of success with companies who are going to their clients to say, oh, you know what? If you were to hire us, you know that you can get 30% of our contracted R&D costs back through your tax credits. Or they're saying, look, if you are choosing to retrofit your gas stove with greener technologies, like that can be subsidized, and we can help do that work. And so thinking about how grants can help your customers hire you and work with your company can be a really, really powerful strategy. Next slide, please. We're going to show you just 3 grants to have on your radar today super quickly, but look at the platform. Again, over 1,800 programs open today. So the first one is Career Ready. So this is part of a larger pool of money that hires students. Student hiring is almost always open. We always say, if you're looking for a student, don't hire without a grant. You can get $7,000 on the $10,000 that you pay a student. That's the max. It ranges between 5 and 7, depending on who you hire. And this is, again, one of many, many programs that fund students, and you can fund the same student multiple times. They can work part-time for you, so it can be really, really flexible. So really great. And then our team is putting links to this for more information in the chat here as well. The next one is IRAP. And it really varies. And very similarly, I think, to a lot of the things that Sydney was saying, is IRAP isn't necessarily a granting agency. They're really mentorship and advice. And yes, they have funds to help support those activities, but it really comes out of having a relationship with IRAP and your ITA. So we encourage everybody to call IRAP. That's how you get started with them. You give them a call, you tell them about your business, and if they think it's a good fit, they'll match you up with an expert in your field. And that expert will be able to help you, yes, sometimes with grants and money, but often with so much more than that. Intros, clients, Pocket's first 100 clients, really a ton of that was because our IRAP ITA reached out to all the companies that he's working with and said, why don't you give this a try? Let them know what you think. And we'll be forever grateful for that. And so it is extremely powerful to partner, and it really is a partnership with some of these government agencies who are really here to help Canadian businesses. And so really take advantage of IRAP. And the last one is Can Export SMEs. This one is a huge one in Canada. We're seeing it become more and more used and more competitive. It opens annually. Last year, it opened at the end of February, so we're expecting kind of similar timing. And it's up to $50,000. It covers half your costs to expand beyond the Canadian market. And so it can be really, really powerful, attending trade shows, doing market research, travel, marketing into new markets. There's so much you can do with this grant. And so we say, anytime you're going to leave the country or, do something new abroad, think about this program, and you have a year to spend it. So every year you can get the $50,000 and you can spend it over that whole fiscal year. So it can be extremely powerful. Next slide. Let's get started today. You can make a free pocketed account with this referral code clusternucleus24. You'll get free access to our software, to the basic version, so you won't have to pay. So, we really do encourage you use this. Look through those grants, look through the matches that you have, and try to find the right programs and think about the activities that you're doing. That is really, really the essential part here. Okay, I'm gonna leave it there, and I think we can go through some questions. So, Sydney, it looks like you've been typing answers to questions, which is awesome. But do you maybe want to do a little recap of some of the questions that have come up for the viewers that are viewing the recording?
Absolutely. Yeah. So I'll just kind of go through. So the first one is about whether you need to have all parties committed in advance. This is actually a question that we get a lot. And so I gave kind of a simple answer where it's quite important. Our calls are typically quite competitive, and so more commitment is always better. But we understand that things change. And so I'll just add a little bit of color to that and say that, we talked about our statement of intent, our expression of interest, and our full proposal. By the full proposal stage, that's where you want to have that level of commitment there. And actually, in our full proposal template, there are sections for the different partners to fill out, because that would then form the contract. So the idea is that at the full proposal stage, you're not kind of waiting to hear that maybe, and I'm sure anyone with any customers knows, you can go to partners and say, hey, would you do this if we got funding? And people say yes. And then they say, okay, it's time to give us the money. And they say, oh, actually. And so more commitment is always going to increase your chances. But we try again to kind of step through that so you're not having to get commitment at the concept stage. The next question is a really interesting one. I haven't heard this before, which is that another cluster wanted to grab trade secrets. And I think that's certainly something that's not the way that the clusters were built. We're not intended at all to be an organization that owns or has access to the IP. The whole purpose of our program is to retain Canadian IP and Canadian companies, and all the benefits that brings. So I would say, an NDA is typically part of our process. We have a code of conduct that partners sign even at the associate stage. And then from there, we work with projects on a project by project basis to make sure that your IP is protected. We really try and work hard with you to protect that. So we do have an IP lead on our team, our director of intellectual property, who I'm happy to connect you with if you've got further questions about that. But that's kind of the spirit of the answer. Can a university provide in-kind contribution? Yes, absolutely. One thing I failed to mention, our eligible costs come from industry typically. So not in our talent program, which is why it's not top of mind for me, because that's my side of the fence. But in the technology side, the only eligible contributions come from industry. So your total cost can include the costs of the university. So maybe the $1 million project idea, the total cost comes in part from industry, but the cash, like the 35% that we're able to cover, has to come from industry. So that's not the question, but I wanted to clarify that. But to the point of in-kind, absolutely. We treat in-kind generally as cash in the sense that it is eligible when it comes from industry. But the nuance there is that in-kind is treated at cost, so not at market value. So we just look for those valuations. So answering more than the question that you asked, but using it as an opportunity to add some more clarification. Do all co-investors in a project have to be members? The answer to that is no. So really, we address this on a case-by-case basis. And the question is, who do you want to be a voting member in your consortium? So who is going to really have that kind of skin in the game piece? From there are other ways that a project member can be involved, or a project partner can be involved without being a member. Which is typically like a lead sub model. So the lead would subcontract a partner to deliver something. And then the lead or the partner that is subcontracting is kind of on the hook to make sure that those individuals or organizations are contributing what they said that they would contribute. Whereas if it's part of the consortium, they themselves are accountable for the work that they've committed to. So kind of moves the risk profile around a little bit. It means that they don't have a voting role in the steering committee, but it does mean that you can work with a broader range of organizations that may want to be involved as members. Typically, like we've had it in the past where there were 21 members of a project, which was a little bit cumbersome, as I'm sure you can imagine, a 21-person steering committee. So The sweet spot for project sizes typically is in the kind of 4 to 6 range in terms of members, but it really is dependent project by project, super small versus super big and all the complexity therein. So all of that to say, no, not all co-investors need to be members. Not all those with costs need to be members. It's really what works best for your project. But in order to receive funds from digital directly, you need to be a member. The cluster program does not mention startups, only scale-ups and SMEs. Federal agencies have told us they refuse to fund advanced tech startup R&D and have told us to go to the USA for funds and then come back when our advanced tech is proven out. There are US agencies that will fund, and we were talking to them. What would the cluster team need to see from us to enter your programs, product market fit with traction? So I can't speak to all 5 clusters. I think this is going to be different cluster by cluster, but for us, it really is dependent on the call for proposals. Sometimes we are looking for larger or more advanced, kind of up the commercial readiness scale, and sometimes we're looking for earlier on. And I think generally one of the factors that we evaluate in a proposal is the readiness of the team. So working in a consortium that sometimes involves a large partner and a university, the startups that we work with have the capacity to manage a project of that size and complexity. And sometimes we're investing $20 million in a project. And so I think, Aria, to your point about the kind of graduated approaches, sometimes a really, really early stage company just isn't ready to take on that level of investment and manage it as the project manager and, who's never worked with government before. So we do look at the capacity of the lead or the organization to manage that. But absolutely, we work with startups in various stages. And again, it really depends on the call for proposals itself, whether we're looking for some earlier stage kind of back of the napkin pieces through to, we have a commercial product in market already, and we're looking to put it into a new context or apply it in a new market or bring it global. So let me know if that doesn't answer your questions. I'm super, super happy to chat further about this if you want to reach out directly or if you've got any further kind of clarification questions.
Well, that's fantastic. Thank you. There was a couple more questions that have come in on what grant can use to hire marketers. And I gave my answer, which is, students can be awesome at social media. Honestly, you can find just a killer MBA student or someone who really knows social and they can take it off. Youth funding, so 15 to 30 comes and goes all the time. It's really important that you're checking for new grants because I can't tell you, we have technology, we have people maintaining this because they come and go so rapidly. There's also right now in BC specifically funding from Work BC in collaboration with WorkSafe. There's just so many different programs, and so really check it out. That's why that list is there. And I think there's one more for you that's open, Sydney, and then we'll be at time. But I thank you so much.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we've got one here about posting the last 2 codes in a link format. I can absolutely share the links from my presentation. I'm not sure if those are also related maybe to some of the links that
we'll share those too.
So yeah, we'll make sure that those get sent around.
Okay, yes, and we will share the recording as well. Great question. So all of that will come out shortly. So we really appreciate everything, and thank you all for coming. It is impossible to have a webinar without the interest that we heard from the community. So thanks for the questions and thanks for attending. Feel free to share the recordings as well. And Sydney, huge thank you to you and taking this time out of your day to tell everybody more about what digital can do for them and with them. So thank you, everybody. Have a great day.
Thank you so much.